If you're designing for print, especially for direct-to-film transfers, it's important to understand color spaces. This is foundational knowledge. Everything else builds on it, and that's why we're starting here. What is a color space? A color space is just a way of defining colors using numbers, so devices can display them or print them accurately. Now, this might sound abstract or confusing, but stick with us. We'll show you some examples later on that make it easy to understand. There are more color spaces out there than most people realize. Some are made for screens, for print, others for video, film, or measuring color in a lab. You've probably heard of RGB or CMYK, but there are a few others you might actually bump into from time to time. Each of these exist for a reason. They solve a specific problem, and they solve them for specific industries. But for DTF printing, you really only need to care about three of these. Those are RGB, CMYK, and lab. Let's start with lab just to get it out of the way. Lab isn't a color space you design in. It's actually a color space for measuring and comparing color, which is why I want to bring it up here, because color matching can actually be a very critical part of the DTF workflow when your clients need you to hit very specific colors. Lab was actually built to model how the human eye perceives color. So whether you realize it or not, you're using it every time you hold up two prints and say, hey, these two prints don't match. Lab is also the language used by advanced tools like spectrophotometers. When we calibrate printers, we use those to check for color accuracy. So while you won't be creating artwork in lab, it is the backbone of how we actually evaluate whether a print turned out right when it comes to the color. Good to know. But now let's move on to the two color spaces that actually matter in day-to-day DTF printing. Those are RGB and CMYK. Starting with RGB. RGB actually stands for red, green, blue. RGB, red, green, blue. It was actually created for screens, or rather anything that emits light. Phones, tablets, laptops, TVs, even some Christmas lights you might buy for the holidays at Home Depot. It's what's known as an additive color space, which simply means it creates color by adding light. So starting with nothing, 0 for red, green, or blue, and you get black. Add full red and you get red. Add full blue to that and you get purple, because you're mixing red and blue light to get purple. You're literally mixing light at different intensities to make the colors. This system can create a huge range of colors, and that range is called a gamut, and we'll break that down in a later video. Design tools like Canva, Photoshop, Illustrator, even if they let you enter CMYK values, still show you RGB on screen. And that's because your monitor can only display RGB. And that's fine, as long as you understand that your printer doesn't speak RGB. Printers don't use light, they use ink. And that's where CMYK comes in. CMYK in the CMYK color space stands for cyan, magenta, yellow, and key, where key just means black. Unlike RGB, which adds light to create color, CMYK is a subtractive color space. It creates color by layering ink and absorbing light. Think of it this way. Your paper starts all white, and the more ink you add, the more light gets removed and the darker the result. Mix cyan, magenta, and yellow together, and you don't get white, you get a muddy brown. Printers use CMYK because they're working with ink, not light, and it's as simple as that. But here's where it gets interesting. Modern DTF printers go well beyond basic CMYK. Many include expanders and neons, and those extra ink channels that can boost the color range. These specialty inks help hit brighter greens, vibrant oranges, and intense purples that standard CMYK just can't reach. If you're working with a high-end DTF setup, like the kind we use at DMandprints, you're unlocking a wider gamut and getting results most basic printers can't. And that's a real advantage, especially for bold, colorful designs. So here's the takeaway. RGB is where your design starts. CMYK is where your print ends. And the more advanced your printer with expanders and neons, the better that translation can be. Now, earlier we said a color space defines color using numbers. Let's jump into Photoshop, open the color picker, and show you an example. Let's actually open up the color palette here in Photoshop. And what we'll be able to do is let's just highlight a color like this blue here. And what you can see over on the right is there is an R, G, and a B value for each one of these colors. So the R is 96, the green is 217, the blue is 232. If I wanted to, for example, make these colors just like, let's say a solid red, let's just go the maximum value of 255 for red and 0 for green and 0 for blue. And now you'll see that that is a purely red color. If you look at the CMYK equivalent over here, 0, 99, 100, and 0. And if I kind of move these around, you can see them changing. Now, if you were to pay very, very close attention to this, you can see right now 0, 99, 100, 0 on the CMYK, but I can kind of move around in this red range quite a bit without actually seeing the CMYK color values change. And that's because the color gamut, which we'll talk about later, is much larger for RGB than it is for CMYK. In other words, we can generate a lot more colors with RGB than we can with CMYK. What you can see is for these color spaces, we're using numbers to represent the colors for both digital and what we would expect to send to a printer for print here with CMYK. Okay, let's move on. A color space is just a way to define and communicate colors using numbers. Now that you've got a clear understanding of color spaces, what they are, why they exist, and which ones matter for turning digital designs into physical prints, it's time to go one step deeper. In the next video, we're going to talk about color gamut and how it affects what colors are actually possible to reproduce in print. Let's keep going.